Okay, today we are going to look at the Ventis Mx4. This is a gas monitor. It's called a multi-gas monitor because it can monitor for a few different gases at the one time. You can get the Mx4 or the Mx6 through Ventis, and all that means is that you're either monitoring 4 gases or 6 gases. You can see here where the senses are, that we have 4 different sensors in this one. This unit that we have monitors for oxygen, carbon monoxide, hydrogen sulfide, and LEL. You can get sensors for most gases that you'll need though, and you can switch them out according to what you need at your site. These are just the ones that I put in for class purposes. This is typically used for personal monitoring and in a confined space. However, it can be used for area monitoring if you needed it to, because these do data log. So as long as you have a data logging unit, then you can use it for area monitoring because you can then download your information at a later time. If the unit that you're using does not data log, then obviously you couldn't use that for area monitoring because you wouldn't be able to get your data. This piece of equipment is a direct read piece of equipment, so it gives us the readings right away on the screen. It's not something that needs to be sent to the lab. And it does have some limitations on the equipment, and you can find those if you look at the equipment specifications in the user manual. Typically you'll see some operating temperature limitations, maybe limitations in humidity, and then with these ones you'll actually see various specifications with regard to each of the sensors, and so it's important to know the ranges at which the sensors work as well. The reason it's important to understand limitations on your equipment or specifications on your equipment is because if you're sourcing this equipment to use in a specific environment or for a specific purpose, you need to make sure that your equipment is actually fit for that purpose or that environment before you purchase or before you rent. So to turn this one on, you press and hold the on-off button, and it's going to beep at you. It's going to vibrate, lights flash, and you're going to let it go. Now, this one, when we turn it on, you can see that it's going to go through a countdown, and directly before that, it showed us all the screens and it had a 26 on it. And what that meant was that there's 26 days left until it has to be calibrated again. And so I'm just showing you, you're waiting for this countdown. And this is the screen it's going to come up to, and it's got a bunch of B's on it. And this is now telling us that it's due for a bump test. Okay? These gas detectors don't have to be calibrated annually, the same way that a lot of our other industrial hygiene equipment does. The reason for that is because we're calibrating the sensors each time before we use it when we do our bump test, and we do a monthly calibration on these. When those calibrations start failing, you can try replacing the sensors because these sensors do have a lifetime or a lifespan. And if you replace the sensors and it continues to malfunction or not get through a calibration properly, at that point then you'll want to send it in for maintenance and for the factory to look at. Okay? So it does not require an annual factory calibration, but the CSA standard does require that these units are calibrated when the bump test results are no longer showing within 100 to 120% of your span gas. So our span gas that we're using here has this is a combination gas, okay? And it has in it all of the gases that our sensors are reading for, and it tells us how much of each of them are in there. And so when our bump test is no longer demonstrating 100 to 120% of the span gas concentrations here in the middle, then at that point we'll want to do a calibration on this, okay? That's the CSA requirement. That being said, Ventis, in the user manual, recommends that we do a monthly calibration on this. So for terms of best practice, we are going to do a monthly calibration on this because it is what's recommended by the manufacturer. So to do a monthly calibration, you can do one of two things. Easiest is if you have a docking station, you put this in your docking station, you close your docking station, and it goes through the calibration process itself. Okay, it does that automatically. We don't have a docking station right here, so we're going to go through this manually so that you understand how to do a manual calibration. During your monthly calibration, what you're doing is you're checking to make sure that the sensors are all reading the gas as it is concentrated in here. You are checking to make sure that your visual alarm, your audio alarm, and your tactile alarm, so the vibration, you're checking to make sure that all three of those work. And it's checking the kind of internals of the system. And so we do this once a month to make sure that all of this is working when our workers take this to whatever location they're taking it to. Now, in addition to a monthly calibration, your workers are going to do a pre-use calibration that's also known as a bump test. Okay? A bump test is recommended by CSA every time before this is used. It is also recommended by Ventis, the manufacturer, every time before this is used. And so because of that, we need to make sure that we're doing a bump test, or that our workers are doing a bump test every time they go to take this into the field. Okay. In addition to that, the third thing, we have to do a fresh air zero. And the reason we do a fresh air zero is to essentially set a baseline of fresh air for the unit and for the sensors so that it knows when it's going outside of that norm. Okay. This unit, unlike a lot of our other equipment, does not require a leak test. It does not require a post-use calibration. So we'll get to the monthly calibration first. In order to get to the monthly calibration screen, you have to go through the fresh air zero screen, okay? And actually, just give me a moment, I'll do that in a second after we get this set up. So you have to put your adapter onto your cylinder. Make sure you don't cross-thread. And then once you have this on your cylinder, you want to make sure that you have sufficient pressure in there. Okay. So right now we are full. We have 500 psi. Okay. And you typically want to have a base on this so that it's not falling over. But I did forget that in the classroom. All right. When you're placing this onto your unit, you're just snapping it on, and you're snapping it over the sensors, okay? And so you can see now that that is fit, okay? So we're not going to deal with that right now. First thing we need to do is go through the fresh air zero. You cannot do a calibration on this manually unless you have it configured to do so. Same thing with the bump test. You can't get in and do a manual bump test unless you have it configured to do so. So in your configuration screen, which you can use your user manual to find out how to get into your configuration screen, once you're in there, if you set your bump test to 1 and set your calibration to 1, then it'll let you do a quick cal, let you do a bump test manually. And the way that you know whether you can do that or not, if we start moving through our screens here, so we can see here, this is the screen I was talking about earlier that tells us we have 26 days left to calibrate. You see that little cylinder at the top, you see the little calendar right here, okay, and 26 days. This is our screen for our fresh air zero. Press mode again. This is your BT, your bump test screen. You wouldn't be able to see this through your mode button if you didn't have it configured properly. These are your peak screens. You can tell by the little mountain right here to let you know what your peaks are. And then these are each of your individual gas readings, okay? So here's our mean screen again, letting us know we need to do a bump test. Before we do that though, we're gonna do a calibration. So I'm gonna go to my fresh air zero screen and I'm gonna press enter. And you can see the clock flashing there. That lets you know that you're doing your zero. And when you finish, if it's successful, you'll see a little check mark in the top left corner. So you wanna look for that check mark to make sure that your zero is successful. And you want to do this in a fresh air environment. So there's our check mark. So from this screen, you're going to press the on-off button, and then you'll see that cylinder flashing, and that lets you know that you're into your calibration. So again, as soon as your Fresh Air Zero finishes, you press, and you get the check mark, you press the on-off button, and when you see that flashing cylinder, you know that you're in your calibration screen. So put your adapter on, and then simply turn on your cylinder, all the way on, quarter turn off, and then you will see here that your unit is sensing the gas. Because there's H2S in these cylinders, you'll smell it as well. It has a rotten egg smell to it. Okay, and you can notice your little clock flashing on the top here, and that lets you know that it's going through its calibration. And again, you're not done here until you get P's or passes on all of these, and you see the lights flash, you hear it beep, and you feel the vibration. So you also need to make sure that all the alarms are working. Okay, so everything's passed. Now we can turn our gas off, and I can hear my sensors. So now you take this out and simply let the gas dissipate from it. Okay? And then once the gas is all dissipated, then you get back to your main screen here and your alarms will turn off. Okay? Now, that is your monthly calibration. We still have to do a bump test before we use it to clear these B's here. Okay? So a bump test is essentially a quick and dirty calibration. Okay? It doesn't take the same amount of time that a calibration takes. It goes through very quickly to make sure that the gases can be sensed, that they're within a range, and that the alarms are working. Okay? It doesn't check any of the internals necessarily the same way that the calibration does. So to get to the bump test screen, again, you just mode through. When you get to the screen that says BT this time, this is when you press enter. Okay? And when it's flashing like that, you put on your gas. Okay, and you can see the clock flashing. Again, I'm getting the alarms here. So they are lighting up. And I can hear it, and I can feel it vibrating, and I've got all P's. That tells me that all of my sensors passed my bump test. So again, I take this off and just let the gas dissipate from the sensors. Okay. So now once I've done that, you're going to see that it's going to go back to the normal operation screen, and now you're actually seeing numbers instead of those B's that you were seeing before. Okay, so this is what it's actually reading right now. You just saw a few numbers in, maybe it was the CO, and that was just the gas dispersing from the sensors, okay, the leftover gas from our calibration. So give it a moment. We've got our oxygen at 20.9, which is normal, and then we've got no H2S here, and we've got no LEL, and we've got no CO, which is what we want. The last thing that you want to do though, before you actually use this, is you want to go clear those peaks. Okay, so now you can see that our calendar has changed to 30. We have 30 days until our next calibration because we just calibrated it. And when we get to those peaks, you'll see that you now have peak readings on these gases. That's because I put the gas on it, right? And so before you have anybody take this into a work environment, we want to make sure that we actually clear these by pressing and holding until everything returns to normal. If you still have a couple numbers on here, it just means you did it too soon after you took the gas off, so just press and hold again, it'll go to 0. And now it's okay for a worker to take this to the workplace. The reason that you want them to clear the peaks before they go into the workplace is because if this does alarm for any reason while they're in there, let's say they're in a confined space, and it starts to alarm, you'll want them to be able to actually check on this screen to determine what the issue was and why it started alarming. And if you haven't cleared your peaks, then obviously you won't be able to gather that information. Okay? So then before your worker heads into the workplace, we're simply going to have this on the main screen. They're going to make sure that they clip it using this clip here. in their breathing zone, okay? So this should not be clipped on a belt, on a tool belt or anything of that nature. It should be clipped at their breathing zone. Sometimes you'll hear workers say that they clip it down nearer to their feet if they're working with a gas that's heavier. And while I understand that, typically we want it in the breathing zone so that as soon as any gas gets into the area where you're going to be breathing it, you'll have indication of that right away. And oftentimes when you're working in a specific space, there's not only one hazard. And so having it in the breathing zone is just the best placement for all of the hazards that are present, okay? The breathing zone, when we're talking about that, usually they'll clip it on a lapel or something like that. You just want to make sure that it's somewhere up near the mouth or the breathing area. So I think that's it for the unit itself. Now, when you're using this to go into a confined space as a piece of PPE, you'll use it just like this, okay? You can, however, use this to actually monitor a confined space to make sure it's safe before any workers go into the space. So if you have a safety watch or a confined space attendant, they can use this to do their monitoring. In order to do that, however, you have to have the pump with it as well. As it stands right now, this unit works just through diffusion, okay? It's not drawing any air into it, there's no pump, it works just through normal diffusion of air. If you need to monitor for a confined space, however, you need to have a pump because you need to be able to put a tubing or a probe into the space and actually draw the air from the space into the unit. So this is the pump that goes along with that. Simply open this latch, place your monitor in like this after you've already done your bump tests and your zero and you know that it's been calibrated. And make sure your sensors are facing out here. And then close your unit, okay? To turn this one on, you just press and hold the on-off button here. And again, you'll get the the beep, and you can hear the pump running, okay? This one also has sensors on it. Those will be them, okay? Sorry, I'm just gonna put this over the audible alarm here. So this one also has sensors on it, and it needs to check those sensors before you use it as well. So you should be able to hear that or feel that vibration, and you should be able to see those lights and hear the audible sensor that you just heard, okay? So the pump is running. Once it checks those, you can hear it is running. The last thing that you need to do before you take this out and use it for your confined space monitoring is you need to check and make sure that the safety system is working. And what I mean by that is if let's say you're using a tubing, and you're obviously a tubing much longer than this, and you're dropping it into a confined space, that goes down quite a distance, might be dark, you can't see. If the end of this tubing for some reason ended up in water or, dirt or something of that nature where it's not actually drawing air from the confined space, we need to know about that because otherwise our readings look normal, but it's not actually pulling air. And so the way we check that is we simply cover the pump at the top here, okay? And when we cover that, it's going to let us know that the air has been blocked and that it's no longer giving us an accurate reading. So I'm gonna put my finger over the audible sensor just so it's not quite so loud. So again, you just cover it and listen to the pump. Okay, so right away when I did that, it let me know that that our safety is working and that we can go ahead and use this in the field. And again, that will just restart by itself, okay, once the blocking is gone. So, as I said, there are a few different ways that you can use this. You can use it with a really long tubing, where you simply place the tubing over the top here, okay, and then drop your tubing into your confined space, if it's a confined space, a vertical space that you're going to be descending into. That's kind of your easiest way there. Or if you have a horizontal space that you need to reach out into, there are a few different probes that you can use. Now obviously this one, as you can see, this is actually a probe that comes with a P-track, okay? This one extends, but it's not going to give you an incredibly long reach depending on how long the space is that you're going into. but could be sufficient, okay? Otherwise, oftentimes you have to makeshift these things to make sure that you can actually get the reach that you need into the space, okay? And the idea is, as you're doing your confined space monitoring, then whoever your attendant is who's doing your monitoring, they'll simply be documenting the results here at every place that they conduct a reading, okay? And you want to be reading, there's recommendations in the CSA standard as to how to do your confined space monitoring to make sure that you're monitoring top, middle, bottom, and at sufficient intervals to ensure that you're checking the entire atmosphere as a whole and that you're not missing any areas where gas may be sitting, or areas that could be oxygen deficient, right? So that's pretty much it. To turn this one off, simply press and hold. Okay. And you want to take your gas monitor out. And then again, you've just got your gas monitor here. And to turn this one off, same thing, press and hold. And that's it. You want to make sure these stay fully charged. And that's all for today. So if you have any questions, I recommend that you look at your user manual, because your user manual, your manufacturer's instructions are obviously the best place to get any of your information for any of this material.